Good morning, everyone. My name is Monica Corda. I'm the Director of Business Development at the Tech Collective, and we're glad to have you here for another informative session with Carl Benevento from Cyberstone Security. Certainly very topical this week. Last
Yep.
week, it was on the mouths of many, right? In the Providence area, ransomware, and how does it affect the company? And we all need to be on the lookout, right? So I'm sure you're going to give us some good and helpful tips to get through this and what should happen. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Tech Collective, we are the IT Industry Association for the state of Rhode Island, providing trainings such as this, certificate trainings, and then as well as opportunities to meet with other like-minded people and connect in the land of technology. Right now, our big push is for our Tech 10 Awards, which happens in November. We do this in conjunction with Rhode Island Monthly. So please, if you know of someone who's really making moves in technology, especially those, we have one area that's for the next tech generation. This is an area sponsored by Cox, and it's for those people who you see maybe they're just in technology, a couple of years. They don't necessarily need to be brand new, young out of school, but new to tech who are making changes in the landscape. I will put up the web page in our chat section. So please take a moment either for next tech generation or Tech 10. So at this point, I will turn it over to Carl so that he can get us going and give us all the information that we're here to hear. Thank
You
you.
got it. Thank you very much. Well, folks, ransomware was deemed one of the biggest malware threats of 2019, and it continues to disrupt the operations of businesses and the daily lives of individuals all over the world in 2020. The 2020 ransomware landscape is quite diverse. Security researchers have tracked over 1,100 different ransomware variants, and because of the COVID-19 pandemic, that number has turned up quite significantly, if you will. So what is ransomware? It is a type of malicious software designed to block access to a computer system until a sum of money is paid. So here is an unfortunate recipient of WannaCry. And if you look at this, it's a business, right? They're telling you what happened to your computer. They tell you how you can recover your files. They tell you how you can pay. Obviously, Bitcoin, everybody has heard of it. That is the widely accepted form of monetary payment for a ransomware event, right? Tells you payment will be raised on how much time you have left. Your files will be lost if you don't pay. Here's a more current page, ransomware page. If you look at the top, welcome to the ransomware page. To get the decryption software and private key for every single infected computer on your network, please follow the on-screen instructions on how to buy and send for Bitcoin. This is an example of BitPaymer, a more current version of ransomware that is out there today. I've always been a fan of David Letterman. Here's my top 10 most recent ransomware variants. Now, I present this not to make light of it, but to get you into the mind of the attackers. And these folks have absolutely no remorse in what they do. Bad Rabbit. This disguised itself as an Adobe Flash installer. Actors demanded Bitcoin with a 40-hour deadline. Cerber. This particularly targeted Office 365 accounts, impacted millions of users worldwide, except in the post-Soviet countries. Think about that one. Petya, not Petya. This was found in 2016. It targeted Windows-based systems, infected millions of people worldwide during its first year of release. GandCrab. This was the most popular ransomware of 2018, and the ransom ranged anywhere to $500 to $600 US. Jigsaw. Actors got creative with this one. This was based on the popular horror movie character. Not only did it encrypt your files, but it deleted them. Bitcoin ransom with the 24 hours to pay. Katusha. Its claim to fame, it threatened to release the encrypted data to public download if the ransom was not paid. Locker Goga. Since the beginning of 2019, it has hit several industrial and manufacturing firms, causing significant harm. Norsk Hydro and two major US-based chemical plants, one right in my own backyard, Momentive Industries. You know how I found out about this one? One of my colleagues was out to dinner with his girlfriend, and he sends me a text and he said, hey, there's a guy at the bar complaining how he had to go run around, unplug all the computers in his department, unplug all the servers, and was told not to come back to work the next day because the network was down. Not the way you want the public to know that you've had a ransomware event. True story. Sure enough, I called. I got a hold of the local office. Actually, I ended up going to an answering service because they had an IP-based phone system. Went to an answering service. They took my name, they took my telephone number. Actually got a call back from the corporate office the following afternoon. They were headquartered out of North Carolina, and they were still down, both their European operations and their US operations. PewCrypt. This one's a little strange, but I throw it in here. The hacker only wanted fans to subscribe to the popular YouTuber PewDiePie to help him reach over 100 million subscribers. Fans thought it was okay. The author eventually released the decryption tool to the public. Ryuk used in targeted attacks against big enterprise. 3.7 million in Bitcoin has been paid so far. Last one, SamSam. SamSam has attacked a wide range of industries in the U.S., mainly critical infrastructure such as hospitals and municipalities, organizations that provide essential functions and have a critical need to quickly resume operations and are more likely to pay the ransom. SamSam's the one that crippled the city of Atlanta for days and cost taxpayers close to $17 million. So what are ransomware consequences? Obviously financial, right? Damages to the brand. If your client's files are now encrypted, if your client's files have been compromised, who wants to do business with you? Employee morale, customer confidence, bad press. As I mentioned before, this individual, complaining pretty loudly that something happened to the business. Could you imagine if there was a local reporter within this establishment while this person was going on and on and on? Fines. Hey, if you are a regulated industry, the fines can be quite significant, from the federal government, from the state and local governments as well. Forensics examinations. I've never been through one, but from what I understand, they are extremely lengthy and costly. If you were on our webinar last week, legal defense and settlements, one of the things that we talked about last week in our webinar was we focused on due diligence. If a law firm can prove that you have not done due diligence to keep your company information safe and your client information safe, well then legal defense could be quite costly and settlements could be quite costly. Loss of payment card privileges and time, resources for remediation and repair. When you have been ransomed, there is no business coming in the door. Your employees cannot function. Nobody's contacting anyone. The business isn't making money. You're paying your employees. They can't work. And then the time to repair after an event, average days it takes to remediate your company from a ransomware attack is 12.1 days. And we talked about that as well quite a bit last week. Who are the actors? Organized crime groups. Majority of the ransomware is being attacks are being committed by organized crime groups. They're nation state affiliated, and are well financed. Post-Soviet countries, China, North Korea, Iran. The last military incursion we had with Iran caused a massive denial of service attack on large U.S. commercial banks. And the FBI actually figured it out that these attackers coordinated their efforts via YouTube. Hacktivists, what we call script kiddies. These are people who use existing computer scripts or code to hack into computers, lacking the expertise to write their own. Are they unskilled amateurs or are they dangerous hackers? And again, this from the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report. Ransomware is still a major issue for organization and is not forced to rely on data theft in order to be lucrative. How does it get in? Primarily email. 90% of all the ransomware that we have seen has come in through a coordinated phishing attack, or spear phishing attack within the organization. The employee opens up a weaponized document, if you will, and now there's access to the network. Also through the web. There's a ton of malicious websites out there, and because of the COVID-19 pandemic, this number now is in the 6-digit range. Victims. Ransomware has no prejudice when it comes to the business it infects. Everyone on this webinar knows a business, friend, relative, or organization that's been hit by ransomware. The public sector, as I just mentioned before, healthcare, financial sector, retail wholesale, professional, manufacturing, IT sector, and education. Both in 2019 and now in 2020, healthcare beat out the financial sector in terms of ransomware costs from the Verizon Data Breach Investigative Report. And we especially saw this uptick with the COVID-19 pandemic. So here's a stat that I want to take a couple of minutes on. This is from Coveware. Coveware is a cybersecurity ransom recovery firm in the Northeast. They published a study on ransomware Q1 of 2020. Small to medium-sized professional service firms such as law firms, IT managed service providers, and CPA firms continue to be the largest industry subset targeted by ransomware in Q1 of 2020. Public sector organizations also jumped in prevalence, predominantly as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak, as I mentioned before. Now, here's a stat that's really kind of alarming. It just shows you the mindset of the people that are committing these crimes. The subset of public organizations most targeted was public schools. This kind of blew me away, but it makes sense. Typically, school systems are targeted over the summer. The timing is designed to force the district to pay before school begins. The rotation in targeting schools in March was likely precipitated by the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced school systems to rapidly offer remote learning. The hasty switch caused many schools to leave themselves vulnerable to attack, and the attacks took full advantage during Q1. Public sector entities were 12% of the attacks in Q1, and almost 50% of those were schools, with other half of a mixture of state and local governments. Healthcare as well took a hit. Attackers focused on hospitals and healthcare facilities. They knew that these organizations could not afford to be down and would pay the ransom. So how do we get some relief? Okay, employee awareness. First and foremost, we have a saying in our business: people, process, technology. We're gonna dig into this a little bit more in the upcoming slides. Make sure that your systems are kept current. Backups, we don't need any backups. So yes, we do need backups. Password policies, very, very important. Administrator accounts. You need to pay attention to security controls. Once hackers get a hold of an admin account, malware can be easily deployed in any organization. Remember, these hackers are patient people. Once they get in, they're gonna take a look at your operations. They're gonna take a look at your business processes. They can even use things such as group policies to push out the malware within the organization. And security controls, right? And we're gonna dig into those. They need to be deployed, they need to be deployed correctly, and they need to be tested. And an incident response plan. It's not a matter of if, but when. You have to have a coordinated incident response plan in place, and it needs to be tested. So the next couple of slides is from our 50-point crypto checklist that we use, right? Employee awareness, as I mentioned before. Make sure that the organization has a formal security awareness training program, right? Make it mandatory for all employees to complete. Make sure that your organization has documented proof that the training was done. Make sure that the training that you're using is regularly updated with current information, and do those controlled phishing tests during the year to verify training effectiveness. Usually in the beginning, when we do these things, we see the click rate very, very high. Hey, here's your new, Amazon gift card. You see the clicks go up. People aren't checking. They're just clicking on a link or they're clicking on an attachment. As you go through the year and you test and you do the campaigns, what'll happen is you'll see that curve go down, and you'll have documented proof of that for your insurance companies or for just the organization itself. Systems are kept current. All right. Can't say this enough. You need to make sure that your operating systems are current and they're supported by the vendor. That you have patching, it's occurring periodically, at least monthly. You have a formal patch management program exists for all applications. The applications that you're using are current and supported by the vendor. Some of the manufacturing organizations that we see that are out there, they still have to rely, believe it or not, on Windows XP and older versions. But if that's the case, make sure that these systems are segmented segmented in a way on the network that they're in their own VLAN. They're only focusing on the task at hand that they need to do, and they're kept rigidly separate from the rest of the network. Make sure that application patching occurs periodically, at least monthly. Make sure you have a formal hardware firmware management program in place for all systems that are in production, and that firmware is current and supported by the vendor, and that patching occurs on that at least monthly. Look to see if you can automate patching technologies. And regular vulnerability scans are conducted to identify known vulnerabilities. Bluekeep is one of them that is still out there. We find it when we do our scans on client networks. Backups. All critical data and system configuration files are in the scope of the backup strategy. You want to put together a formal business impact analysis study, right? Because you want to determine your RTO and your RPO. What is RTO and RPO? RTO, recovery time objective. This is the amount of time that passes between application failure and the full availability of that application, including data recovery, right? Recovery point objective, or RPO, is the amount of time between loss of data and the preceding backup. Really, it's a time metrics. You need to figure out how far can you go before your business is severely impacted. And obviously, when you have a ransomware event, if your backups are compromised or you don't have a clean backup, this could be a significant problem for your organization. Make sure that you have a backup strategy that leverages the 3-2-1 rule. What is the 3-2-1 rule? You have 3 copies of a backup, 2 different media, 1 is offsite. Make sure your backups are secure and not constantly connected to the production network. This is key. Backups are periodically tested to verify integrity and usability. I have a client up in Saratoga, New York, and once a quarter in the evening, they test their backups, and the backup device that they're using, they are actually able to run a subset of the business off of their backups. And they do this once a quarter to test to make sure things are in part of their incident response plan, that this operation is functional. Make sure your backup media has sufficient capacity for routine backup jobs to complete, and make sure that they are monitored. Alerts and notifications for any backup job failures need to be set to the appropriate personnel. Make sure that you have a formal disaster recovery plan and that it's documented, right? And members of the disaster recovery plan response team are properly trained. You can actually go through a tabletop exercise as well too, and the same can be done with an incident response plan. Password policy. Make sure that a formal password policy exists and has been read by all authorized users. All right. Passwords minimally 8 to 14 characters in length. I'm pretty sure that we're all used to this, even in our private lives with any banking that we may do, even with our own personal email that we end up using. Passwords should meet a complexity requirements: 1 uppercase, 1 number, 1 special character. Passwords really should be changed every 30 days. All right. And previous passwords cannot be reused, and accounts are locked up after 3 login attempts. Part of the time when we do our penetration testing, we'll do what we call what I call a dark web reconnaissance. So we're going to go out there and we actually look for credentials that may be sitting out there on the dark web. And you will be surprised at the amount of passwords that get reused or used, the same password for many different applications, both at work and for personal use. Administrator accounts, as we mentioned before. Make sure end users are not provided local or domain admin credentials. Make sure that domain admin accounts are restricted to only those who need them. And if there's any type of modification, deletion of these accounts, it obviously needs to be monitored and reported on. And the organization maintains an inventory of all admin accounts within the organization. That's key. Security controls. Make sure your AV or anti-malware software is installed on all applicable assets. That includes any company provided mobile phones. Make sure that it's properly configured and it's regularly updated. You can even deploy complementary controls that provide acute protection against ransomware attacks, such as a SIEM-based product. Make sure that email and web filtering technologies are installed, properly configured, and are regularly updated. Make sure RTP ports are closed, secure remote access technologies are used. We saw a lot of this with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? People just ended up hastily expanding their remote access devices and any type of technology that they would use so that their employees can safely work from home. These things also need to be made sure that they're updated and regularly tested. Make sure the IP network is also segmented properly. Ban the use of old thumb drives, period. Acceptable use policy exists and has been read by all authorized users and signed off on. And that internet browser security settings are properly configured and enforced. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we did see quite an uptick in acceptable use policies. Some companies have had stuff that sat with HR, that sat in the employee handbook, but we've actually updated a few for our clients, and these items were sent out via email. They were read and they were signed off on. Incident response plan. Last but not least, have that incident response plan in place. It's not a matter of if, but when. Make sure that it's documented, and the members of the incident response team are properly trained. You actually could run through a tabletop exercise as an organization. Let's say a specific breach occurs. So you could sit in the conference room, spend an hour, even do it during lunch. Go through the plan, because your applications may change, your business processes change, but this should be looked at least 2 to 3 times a year. So let's talk about some technical control testing that we can do to help with ransomware relief. Vulnerability scanning. When you do a vulnerability scan, you're identifying vulnerabilities in the organization's informational systems, networks, and applications. Should be done both internally and externally on the organization. It'll improve the overall security posture of the organization, right? And it absolutely plays a critical role in an organization's ability to defend against security threats. It also supports compliance, right? It can satisfy your organization's regulatory, commercial, organizational compliancy requirements, but also too, it really helps you develop a remediation plan. So even if you're not a regulated industry, when you get done with a vulnerability scan, you have a plan in place, critical, high, medium, and low vulnerabilities that need to be addressed. Penetration testing. This identifies vulnerabilities in the organization, informational systems, networks, and applications, all right? But it takes it a step further from vulnerability scanning. All right. The penetration test identifies vulnerabilities and exploits them in an organization's information technology assets, right? This includes operating systems, applications, and servers that a malicious attacker may exploit to gain access into internal networks and critical systems. So when our ethical hackers or our white hats get into a penetration engagement, so we're doing that vulnerability scan, if you will, but any of the vulnerabilities we find, we're going to exploit them. You know, the goal is to see how far north to south, east to west we can get within an environment and report on it. And we developed that remediation plan. It is a much more detailed remediation plan because obviously now we've exploited what we have found. And this is done by our ethical hackers or our white hat hackers. One of them happens to actually be in the call with us today. So if you have a question on that, I'm pretty sure Bruce would be more than happy to answer your questions. Security awareness training. I call this the necessary evil. As I mentioned before, obviously, people process technology. It will reduce the occurrence of ransomware attacks, right? From preventing that employee from clicking on that weaponized document. You know, obviously ransomware comes into the organization, as I mentioned before, via web and email. The phishing and ransomware awareness components of any platform out there will help you reduce the interaction with fake and malicious emails. It'll help you reduce data loss. Employees who are educated are less likely to let sensitive information leave the organization. And it also shows a documented reduction in risk. And again, if you were on the call last week with us when we talked about due process and cybersecurity, by training your users, phishing them, retraining them, and rephishing them, you can show a downward trend of users interacting with fake emails. And again, all of this can be documented. Questions, Gressa? Anything? Any questions out there from the audience?
No, right now I don't see any questions.
Okay. Okay.
Do you want me to ask one that's? I'm curious what you think, Carl. Should, if you are under attack, should you pay the ransom?
You know, that's a very good question. The FBI says that you shouldn't pay the ransom, but obviously during the COVID-19 pandemic, as I mentioned before, the organizations that had to be up and running, that were critical to life here in the United States, they ended up paying the ransom. That's why it's very, very important to have good backups. It's important to have an incident response plan in place. It's important to have technical controls in place that can prevent the ransomware events. Cyber liability insurance kind of plays into that a little bit. What we're seeing now with the big cyber liability carriers that are out there that actually underwrite this insurance, they will dictate. So if you do a policy with them, they're now going to dictate whether the ransom is paid or not. And on another note, with cyber liability insurance, it does not guarantee that they're going to cover the entire ransomware loss, right? Because things that you now have to take into consideration, let me turn my camera back on. Things that you now have to take into consideration are, you have to alert the public. That has to be done. You're going to end up having cleanup time and money put aside to it. You're going to have to also potentially have legal issues, depending upon what information was stolen, what information was exposed, and how your clients were affected. Cyber liability insurance does not cover all those things. It covers some of it, but still a large chunk of if it's a very successful breach and ransomware attack, it is going to be on the business to pay for those damages.
Can I add to that?
Sure, Bruce.
Yeah. So, hey everybody. So I work with Carl at Cyberstone. I'm one of the senior analysts over here. But yeah, when we deal with these ransomware attacks, the first call always has to be to the cyber carrier. They may have a negotiator, on speed dial that they deal with that has a, kind of like a direct link to the bad guys to be able to make sure they're going to get the data back and whatnot. We also know the cyber carriers have PR firms that work with, like Carl said, in some cases you're required to notify the public. a lot of times, though, you don't want to notify the public, right? You have to make sure that that gets protected. So the cyber carrier helps with that. They have PR firms. They help with the message, the incident response planning, and kind of making sure that staff doesn't know what's going on, or they don't need to know. You don't want them, leaking this information out as well. And then, one other thing to add and to think about what's happening now with ransomware attacks is when they get into the organization via that phishing attack that Carl talked about, then they go and they get that admin account, right? And then once they have this, they start now looking to use like group policy to push, the BitPaymer or whatever they're pushing down to try to encrypt everything, or if they're only able to get control of a handful of servers, they want to get paid, and people were having backups offsite and not paying. So now they're stealing your data as well. And now they're taking your data and they're saying, okay, here's the deal. You're going to pay us. And if you don't, we're going to release your data on the dark web. So when Carl mentioned, oh, we have all these credentials and stuff out there, that's just one piece of it. Medical records on the dark web are like gold, right? In one medical record, you have enough information to completely perform an identity theft attack on somebody, right? I mean, everything is there. Their social security number, their address, all this information. So now the bad guys are realizing that value. So as they steal your data in an attempt to kind of extort you and say, listen, you're going to pay the ransomware, or we're going to release this, but then they're releasing it as well. So it's all that stuff Carl talked about becomes real important, but that incident response, controlling it, the cyber carrier, the PR firm, negotiators, it's all the real stuff that we see, surrounding these types of attacks today.
Good point, Bruce. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a question, and I'm hoping I'll pronounce his name correctly. Bushan has asked, can you please tell us more on security framework? And then he's also looking for some information on vertical cybersecurity solutions, as well as SOC and NOC solutions. So Bushan, I will put you in touch with Jana from Vertical 6 to talk about those last two pieces offline, but certainly about security frameworks. If you guys could touch upon that, that would be great.
Sure. With our particular practice, we strictly follow the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? And depending variants of it. So it's NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. They've been around since 1901. They are pretty much the de facto when it comes to standards for with the government, for government and commercial regulatory compliance, right? So we have the capability to see how well you stand up against NIST. If you are a healthcare provider, we have the capability to see how well you stand up against HIPAA. If you're manufacturing, because I know Rhode Island, there's quite a bit of manufacturers out there. You had the NIST DFARS regulation that SP 800-171 Rev 1, which was for manufacturers that happen to work in the DoD space. That is now changing now. That is now going to be referred to as CMMC. And it's basically a version of DFARS that has been expanded now to include privacy. But we have the capability as well, too, to see how well you stand up against those regulations. And it is very important that you do align yourself with, even if you're not regulated, to align yourself with a cybersecurity framework. It's important because it gives you steps and it gives you a sound fundamental practice to keep your business safe. Bruce, is there anything that you wanted to elaborate on that?
No, that was well said. Yeah, the frameworks are there, and they just provide the guidelines, and then your interpretation.
Yep.
This is kind of what Vertical 6 would do, or what Cyberstone would do, and help you to understand what's needed to hit those those compliance platforms. It's becoming
Right.
more and more important every day, and even from a standpoint of non-compliance, keep in mind you can always ask your vendors, your partners, the people that you share data with and that you work with, to show you that they're doing their diligence on,
Yep.
this type of stuff. We see, like, especially in the finance world, right? Well, hey, we have to do these pen tests. We have to do these vulnerability assessments. We have to do risk assessments. We're not going to do business with you if you can't show us that you're doing that as well. So, you can kind of ask that information for anybody that you do business with today, and then decide whether or not you want to do it, because you're putting their data. A ransomware attack begins most times somewhere else outside the company, right? So if somebody's not taking care of their stuff and their resources are compromised, those compromised resources could be a mailbox where they're emailing with you, and now they just send an email from that person's mailbox. You think it's from your trusted colleague, associate, vendor partner, whoever it is that's sending you an email. You open up the email, and then boom, now you are now the victim of a ransomware attack. And I'll tell you, the last time that I saw something like that, it was a Russian organization called Indrik Spider, and in 24 minutes, they moved through the network and got 142 computers under their control. And then they tried to download ransomware, and this company had a SOC as a service that caught the data, going out. So, we think of the, to loop back around to that NIST framework, I kind of lost my thought on that as to what we were saying. But yeah, with the ransomware attacks, they just come from, these trusted sources. So don't hesitate to ask, the other people that you're doing business with to just verify and prove that they're doing, their diligence and they're protecting their resources so that you don't get attacked in some secondary type of a situation.
Well, and Bruce, you mentioned with the framework, that's one of the things that is part of, that is at least part of DFARS or the standard NIST cybersecurity framework that's out there, is that third-party service vendor policy, right? As you just mentioned before, these frameworks will give you a roadmap to follow, right? And again, we can see how well the organization stands up against it, and then we can also give you a remediation plan and tell you, what you need to fix to be in compliance with that roadmap. And again, the whole goal of these roadmaps, if you will, or these frameworks, is to bolster your cybersecurity posture, right? And especially with NIST too, they were pretty active during this whole COVID campaign. They've updated their remote access documentation. So they're like I said, they are the de facto industry standard that's out there today from a cybersecurity perspective.
Super. Thank you both. I don't see any other questions in the chat box, but you have certainly covered a huge amount of information today. So thank you, Carl, and for Bruce for chiming in as well. We have a survey, a one-question survey in the chat box. Please, if you were a participant, if you can take a moment, just so we know if we're hitting the mark with the presentations that we're putting out to you. And a large thank you again to Jonna from Vertical 6 for getting Carl to come and join us and really impart some information that's pertinent to all of us during these times, and for Creosa from the Tech Collective who organizes everything and gets us on and here. So we thank you all, and thank you both again for coming, and we look forward to hearing more from Cyberstone. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Monica.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day, and everyone be well.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.